everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Outspoken series by Incest Aware. I am Josephine Loren. I am an author and an activist, as well as an incest survivor. Incest Aware is a community of individuals and organizations seeking to improve incest prevention, intervention, recovery, and justice. Today, I have Donna Jenson with me, who I believe is our most seasoned anti-incest activist in our community. So I am so honored that she has offered to share her time. Today, we're going to be talking about the history of the anti-incest movement and how it's changed over time and what she kind of envisions for the future. Donna, you want to give yourself a more thorough introduction?
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here with you, Joe. This is wonderful. Yes, seasoned. That's a sweet way of putting it. I've been around a long time. I'll be 77 my next birthday. My project is called Time to Tell. I actually started as an activist in the issue incest and child sexual abuse and abuse, I add on sexual trauma, starting probably in my 50s. That was almost 30 years ago. And I ended up writing a play, a one-woman show based on my life. And then from that, I wrote a book. Somewhere between the play, writing the play and the book, I found it Time to Tell, with a mission to spark stories from lives affected by incest and sexual abuse to be told and heard. The backbone of the project is online writing circles for survivors of sexual trauma. Started out by doing an art exhibit of bronze statues of the stages of surviving from child to life to age. Those statues at conferences and some neighborhood community gatherings. And then I would sort of stand behind them and just let people interact with the statues. People would start asking me, "Oh, are you the artist?" "Oh, no, I support the artist, collaborate with the artist." And finally, I had to start saying, well, I'm a survivor. I knew I wanted to do something about the issue. I knew art had to be in it because we just need artistic slant for people to be able to open up. And then after that is when I needed to write my own story, to do it in the form of one woman play, a woman's show. It's called What She Knows, One Woman Way Through Incest to Joy. So I did that. I had great mentors in terms of playwriting and fabulous dramaturg who helped me sharpen it. That's one of the things that I've been incredibly blessed with. And I know it's that these are the indicators that I'm on the right track. Every time I decide I want to do this, the universe delivers exactly what I need. Halfway through workshopping the play, I got breast cancer. Stop and take care of it. And my director was fabulous, Cheryl Studley, serious play. She was wonderful. And she said, "Don't worry, even if you're laying on the stage on your back reciting the play, it's going to have an effect on people." It was like,
Give us a bit of history. Can you kind of place
yeah,
it for us in time?
yeah. So I will say I was a grassroots organizer back in my 20s and 30s. So, second wave of feminist movement, building women's centers in 3 boroughs of New York, and did that for about 15 years. In the midst of that, in the 70s, early 80s, begin to start dealing with my own trauma.
Yeah.
And I was running support groups. That's what a lot of the feminists, a lot of the movement, if you want to call it, around sexual abuse started in that place
Right.
in the 70s. So that's where I was. And it was very, decentralized, know each other from Adam. Nobody knew anybody was anywhere. Just our own little spots in the world, recovering from whatever we were recovering from. Remember, we didn't even have battered women's shelters. There was no such thing. And the first thing we had, and it was in Park Slope, Brooklyn, which is the area that I lived in, had started a safe homes project so that for 2 or 3 nights, a woman and her kids could come and stay in these people's homes. They reached out to you know what I mean? It's like that was the beginning of the Rape Crisis Center and a little bit around incest, although incest has always been the stepchild of violence movement. And
Were people open to the conversation and wanting to include it, or did they have other activism priorities, and so it was pushed aside? What was really the reason for incest still being a marginalized issue within the greater issue of rape?
well, so I think a couple of things. First of all, there were very few of us who were survivors who had gotten enough muscle to speak and stand up to it and so forth. So that's huge right there. And I think that's still the case. Like you in your questions you asked about where's the movement going. I think it still is always first and foremost, how healed are we? How ready are we? How confident are we to speak about our issue and engage with others? And that's why my whole shtick is all about helping other survivors find their voice, that wherever it is they're going to want to use it, whether that's their family, their community, a particular industry, or whatever. And so back then, there were so few of us that were out, so few that were out, and it was so taboo, right? Super taboo. And I think one thing that that was present back then, that is still today, I've gotten pushback on this before, but I'll say it again. I think when your focus is domestic violence, there is the issue of the non-offending parent who is also the non-protective parent. And it's so charged. It's so layered. It's so hard. It was my mother, right? She was a battered woman and she didn't protect her kid. It's complex. And I think that's still the case. And I think that's still the case for those who are advocating, right? How do they hold that very complicated dichotomy? It's a hard dichotomy to hold. I think that both those things were, and the fact that we had no money. Nobody had any money for anything. Not that we are now just bulging with cash. There was nobody funding, barely anybody funding women's issues, let alone incest. Oh my God.
So, what has kept you going as an anti-incest activist all these years? How have you sustained this work with taboos, with the obstacles, with the lack of funding? What has kept you committed?
I'm very tenacious. I arrogantly believe I'm right. I don't care what anybody says. I have something about this. And because I was a grassroots organizer and also I was a party girl, I always loved engaging with people like-minded and funning, the same kind of fun people. You know what I mean? So I have built a family of choice over the years that is extremely strong, extremely connected. My family of choice is both our pillars and engines and challengers and pillows for me, that I wouldn't have done anything if I hadn't had that.
I remember when #MeToo went viral in 2017. That's when I really came forward and went public with my story. I felt like I had been in this really difficult healing journey and had a small group of supportive friends to help me get through that, but otherwise had no social or systemic support. And I remember feeling so confident that I had to use the word incest when I published my story. I wanted incest specifically to be represented in the movement and did not see media representation of intrafamilial sexual abuse. And I had friends who were saying, don't use the word incest. It makes people uncomfortable. Water it down, simplify it, use something else. more people will read it. And I was like, me, I was so stubborn about it. I was like, I have to use this word. And when I did, the word was what connected me to community because there's so few good resources on the internet. If you Google the word incest, you'll often find pornography or really outdated, really rather gross articles
Right.
that really are pushing the pro incest movement, which people are always surprised to learn about, still exists. It's just been so powerful to find that a community with common experience, with a similar language. We've often done similar therapeutic practices. So, yeah, it's been such a gift to experience the community dynamic of just being around other survivors.
Oh my God, yes. And you don't even have to get into any detail.
Right.
Just saying you're a survivor, that's enough.
It's enough.
We can end up sharing more if and when it makes sense or useful. A lot of survivors who are interested in my writing groups, the thought that everybody's a survivor, like they've never been in a group with other survivors.
Right.
Still is the case where many survivors are out to their closest friend or two, maybe a family member or two, and possibly a therapist. And that's it.
Right.
I understand because I've been there. I totally get it. Because for me, it was like, I got enough to deal with my own trauma. I don't want to hear another one. Imagine not having a life filled with survivors because it's so healing.
So,
Just sit here with you. We don't can do anything and we're healing right here.
so what are your hopes for the movement now, moving forward?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I always wish I could win the lottery. Big ones that are like, 500 million or a billion, whatever dollars, that I would a nice chunk of it and just have this centralized resource. Want to try this? Here's some money. That I really do.
Yeah.
I have so little patience and interest in going after money. I'm blessed with enough direct donors that keep trying to tell above water. I think it is direct donors where you're going to get the best money overall. My most joyful project, other than the circles, which I love them pieces because I'm in it. I'm writing with everybody. I'm in 4 circles a week, every other week. But I have my collage project, which I have tech moderators who are also survivors. Listen to the writing and then create a collage that reflects the images from the writing. Here's just one.
Oh, beautiful.
And so that all came out of one writing session, a 2-hour writing session with survivors. And the quotes, some of them come out of the actual writing, and some, the person that created it may find something that seems fitting. So we've got dozens of these, just dozens of these. I'll turn it off. And so we ended up putting together an exhibit of 15 of them. And I've been on tour wherever I can go that will let me. When this stuff gets put out there, and that's what's true for the statues and the play and the whatever, when this gets out there, people just come out of the woodwork. Survivors come out of the woodwork. That's the title of it. Telling is healing. Because every time we tell, we heal.
Yeah.
Every single time. We just get like a jolt of medicine.
Another vision that I have for Incest Aware is, I just became really aware of the power of the anti-incest movement in the 80s and 90s recently.
Oh.
And one of the reasons that I didn't know about it was because most of the projects that were happening or other things that were happening around it were never digitized. They were never brought online. And so it was erased, or it's in books that were written a long time ago that I haven't read yet. So one of my goals as the community organizer of Incest Aware is to create an archive of anything we can find to add it to our website or some other platform to ensure that all of our work is available to us, that we know, not just that we can learn to identify our experiences and what happened to us and how that affected us, but also our history as incest survivors. As I'm sure you know, there's been oppressive movements throughout every large public stance. There has been a huge backlash, starting with Sigmund Freud and the etiology of hysteria, where he published a book all about child sexual abuse survivors and it really being the foundation of hysteria, which we know is just the first name for PTSD. And it was completely rejected by the European society. And so Freud turned on survivors and called them liars. It did not stop Bertha Pappenheim, who then, as one of the women who he worked with, she coined the phrase talk therapy, went out to Europe and became the first child sexual abuse survivor activist throughout Europe that I've heard about. I'm sure there were many more, but so far that I've heard about, and did child safety activism all throughout the continent, so much so that Germany gave her own stamp, which was pretty cool.
Very cool.
And then we didn't hear about PTSD until veterans came home from World War I, and then veterans came home from World War II, and then we applied it to sexual violence in the 1970s and 80s with the women's movement, the second wave of feminism. And then we had the false memory backlash, right? As you know, in the 90s. So now,
It just broke the spine of the movement for a while.
do you want to talk about your experience and explain
Well-
what it was?
Well, for me, I mean, it came out of the West Coast. I think her name was Freud. Was it Jennifer Freud? It was
Jennifer Fry, I think, or Frey.
It was her parents that started it. And look, if you're going to get that kind of backlash, if you're going to get legal backlash, you're going to stop talking. And that's
Right.
what it, and it terrorized the therapist, the therapy field hugely, hugely. And then, there's just, for me personally, I finally came out to my family. Actually, my brother of 10 years younger than I was in my 50s. It was long after the post memories. When my brother said, did our dad do something to you? He and his wife figured it out. A long story, but they figured it out. And I admitted it. I said, yes, yeah, did. My brother was furious. He went and confronted my father. My father said, I can't remember doing such a thing. And my brother decided that I was making false accusation. And then refused to ever speak to me again, wouldn't let me niece and nephews. This is 30 years ago. And then after 25 years, he died. And my niece, who I was deeply in love with, contacted me after her father died. When she died, she felt she could, reach out. And it took us several years to tiptoe back to each other. But now, last month, she brought her husband and kids for their first family vacation from Wisconsin. They came to our house for vacation. It's just absolutely freaking remarkable. I know that the false memory people laid the groundwork for my brother.
To give our listener a little context, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, basically, a lot of incest survivors were coming forward with what's called dissociative amnesia, which means that you did not remember what happened to you as a child and you remember much later. This is much more accepted now than it used to be, that trauma can cause memory delays, memory issues, memory avoidance. And this is the case for a lot of incest survivors, not all of us. Some people remember all the way through. Some people remember later in life. The average disclosure rate or age of disclosure for child sexual abuse survivors at large is in your 50s. And then some people never remember and yet have this story of chaos and trauma in their body that they just can't link to any sort of visual memory. And the False Memory Foundation came back and said, survivors are liars. These memories are made up. Who do they think they are? And it actually took a pretty strong hold, specifically within the medical community, that survivors and or therapists were working to make up memories to break apart the family system and to accuse parents. And I'm so sorry to hear what you experienced. And the family abandonment after incest survivors disclose is so common. And that's what happened to me too. I disclosed, and my mother said, I believe you, but you should forgive him. I came from a very Catholic context, whereas my brother said things like, your story doesn't add up, or wasn't it just emotional rape, or whatever else was the way you say, I don't believe you. So family abandonment is so real, and that happens on both interpersonal levels, but it also happens on institutional levels. And that's what we saw. And it's been so sick because the more I kind of uncover incest survivors' history, the more I really see how validated my father would have been as someone who was harming me in the 1980s, because you had the false memory foundation telling the world that survivors are liars. And then you also had physicians, like if you just Google incest, you can find articles pretty close to the top about how children are complicit in their own abuse, how children are seductresses to their fathers or to whoever else is abusing them. So he could have gone to medical authorities at the time and been justified that it was okay that he was sexually abusing me because it was my fault. And this was in the 1980s. Like, this wasn't that long ago. And yet people are horrified. There's another quote in like the major psychological text in the 1980s suggested that incest was 1 in a million or something, and that incest prepares you for your future. It prepares you to enter into a difficult world. That is what most psychiatrists were learning. Yep. And then we had our physicians like Judith Herman and Bessel van der Kolk and others who said, no, this is wrong. Like, we're working with so many incest survivors. The rate can't possibly be accurate if the 1% all found their way into my office, right? So they started challenging this. They very clearly saw the psychological, neurological, and physiological impacts of this form of abuse and said, we have to shift the story. So Laura Davis and Ellen Bass. And then we had so many literature writers. Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou did such a beautiful job writing the Bluest Eye and Why Does the Cage Bird Sing? And all these books that really like drove personal storytelling by them telling their own stories. There was another book called Crossing the Boundaries by Melba Wilson about Black incest survivors' experiences. So we had this movement and this counter movement. We had the pro-incest team and the anti-incest team. And then it got erased, and it lives in your memory, right? And it lives in the memories of people like Eve Ensler, who now goes by V, and Stacey Haynes and these other activists. So I'm trying to like get on their doorstep so I can learn about where we come from. Because as we know, as activists, we can't figure out where to go if you don't know where you've come from. And that our history isn't just about us. It's about all survivors before us. If we want to think about the future of our movement, we have to understand the past of our movement, you know?
Well, you mentioned Judith Herman. She wrote Father-Daughter Incest in 81 and then came out with Trauma and Recovery in 91 or 2. Those two books are so important.
Right.
So important. I was very lucky. My one name to drop in the world is I'm friends with Gloria Steinem. And I decided to move out of the city up to Western Mass. And this was 1992. And I went to see her and we were hanging out. And she's so urban. And she wouldn't quite wrap her mind around why I needed to leave the city because I was
like a true New Yorker.
And I said, well, I want to write a book. I really want to write a book about what I've survived, what I've gone through. And she reached into her bookcase and she said, I think you need to read this early edition of Trauma and Recovery. I've got it sitting in the bookcase. And it blew me out of the water.
Yeah.
And it still, I think, is a seminal read. I think every survivor should read that.
Judith Herman just came out with a new book called Truth and Repair.
I have it here. I haven't read it yet. I bought it the minute it came out, and it's sitting there, and I know I've got to read it.
And then Bessel van der Kolk, as we know, wrote Body Keeps the Score, and I think that came out around 2014.
Did you read Judith's new book?
I did. I'm not all the way through it. I'm listening to it on an audiobook, so I'm getting through it. It's good. I mean, it's certainly values aligned to my own values and just trying to figure out transformative justice solutions that aren't continuing cycles of violence for anyone, which I appreciate.
Friends of mine, a couple of people have said, I'm not trying to brag here, but they said, the things she's prescribing in the new book, Donna, you've been living it. He referred back to actually rape crisis centers where women who survived rape not would start volunteering in organizations, and they actually had some evidence that these women were healing more strongly if they had gotten involved in some kind of activist activity. And I believe that 100%. I also don't think everybody's got to become an activist, but there is something about standing up for your own issue at whatever level that is very healing.
Yeah. And I think what we're working on now is ensuring that survivors are paid for that time, right? That they are compensated for their emotional labor and for their time in sharing their stories that are often bringing in a lot of money for nonprofits. So that's the next wave of our work, right?
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Don't bark at anybody. I'll join you.
Perfect. I will let you know when I'm ready. Another great book that was published recently about trauma that it's not about incest, but it has an incest story in it. And she used the word is What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu. Do you know this book?
No.
It made it to the New York Times bestseller. She writes about being abused and abandoned as a child in Palo Alto, California, and her healing experience having complex PTSD. And so it's really an integrated narrative of her personal story with scientific studies around complex PTSD. But she does share an incest story, and it's a small little bit, but I felt very represented in it. And it was a very complex story. And I was really grateful that she shared it. So I'm hoping to reach out to her and just seeing if we can connect about the issue and continuing to disseminate
What's
activism around it. What My Bones Know. And it'll come right up. It's a really famous book. Yeah.
good? Good.
Yeah. Yeah. Any last thoughts? I know we're just about at time here.
The message I want to send out is every survivor, take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Whatever that looks like, take care of yourself. And every chance you get, tell your story. Project, it's called Shared Stories. Somebody wants to submit one, be curated. I'm happy to get it.
That's a beautiful last message. If you're looking for a platform to tell your story, Incest Aware has a blog. We do really focus on kind of what you've learned from your experience or advice you might have for other survivors. There are other storytelling focused organizations on our website that you can find. So as we always say, know that you're not alone. And if you're looking for support, please go to the Alliance. We offer a number of direct services through the organizations that we have. Otherwise, we wish you well in your healing journey. And thank you so much, Donna, for being with us today and sharing your wisdom and your art with us.
It's been a pleasure. Your pleasure.